The MTA is trying out a new tactic to crack down on subway fare evaders. The idea is making it take 15 seconds for emergency exit gates inside stations to open. But while the MTA...
Every day, the New York City subway gets a little bit worse, a little bit more lawless. But instead of arresting the bad guys, the city's decided that they're better off just locking us all in here together, hoping that that will make us decide to start paying the fares on our own. Which critics say not only won't work, but could put us all in danger just so that the city can keep protecting its criminals.
If you use public transportation, obviously you're supposed to pay. But there is an epidemic across the country, people skipping out on paying their fare.
The exit door becomes a way not to pay. The front lines to prevent fare evasion for the MTA are the gates.
Now the MTA has an idea on how to crack down by adding a 15-second delay to the emergency exit gate.
MTA always comes up with outrageous ways of, I guess, saving money.
That's a very bad idea.
50 seconds is like, it can be dangerous. That happens all the time.
We all pay, and for those who don't pay, it's unfair for those who are paying.
People are getting demoralized who play by the rules because they see somebody else breaking the rules.
We just caught you jumping. Why did you do that, sir?
While we were talking to him, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The MTA says police are writing many more tickets for fare evasion.
Massive fare hikes or service cuts does not help anybody. We must get everybody to pay their fare.
That's how people ride for free, right there. Yet the city has no idea why people are breaking into the subway, so they're gonna hire a psychologist to figure it out. But what nobody's talking about is that every single plan that wants to stop crime down here without actually punishing anybody is doomed to fail. Just like the city's other plans at stopping crime everywhere else, which is why we're being overrun by protests, a shoplifting epidemic that's closing our stores, and there's even a crime wave going on right now in Central Park. Critics say all these problems exist because every time the city lets the bad guys off the hook, they've got another reason to try and get back on the hook. Which means our no consequences justice system makes New York a training ground for criminals. If you get caught stealing under $1,000, don't worry, you won't go to jail. Caught sneaking into the subway, no ticket, no fine. And if you get caught with a weapon, the DA will drop the charges as long as you look sorry when you get arrested. 5 more people just went right in, and that brings us to the real reason why the subways down here just keep getting worse despite the extra police, despite the National Guard. All these amazing men and women in uniform who are put here for security might look intimidating, but their hands, the hands of justice, are tied behind their backs as they helplessly watch the city lose millions of dollars thousands of times a day when people break into the train. And not only does all this criminal activity make the subway worse for those of us who actually pay to use it, since the city's decided not to punish criminals and make them pay, they're coming for the rest of us. And unfortunately, it's gonna cost us all a lot of money. So here we have the subway turnstiles, ground zero in the war on people's wallets. Because every single person who jumps or rides for free costs the city money, and they pass those costs on to the rest of us. But the city does have some new, innovative plans in place to try and get people to pay to use the train on their own.
The exit door becomes a way not to pay. Once it's open, it can stay open too long.
We all pay, and for those who don't pay, it's unfair for those who are paying.
The front lines to...
So as you can see right here, the biggest problem the city has is with these exit doors. This is how people are gaining access to the system without paying all throughout the day. At least these are the main way people get in. Other people just hop right through the turnstiles themselves. But when these open up and the alarm goes off, it's almost a green light for people to rush through. But millions of people ride the subway every day. It's like a cage. We need emergency exits like this door, or if there's something bad that happens, people are going to be trapped inside, which is the first reason this new plan to stop fare evasion is controversial. But before we get to that, realize that the big problem here is that most of these exits are unmonitored. Once the door's open, it stays open until it either shuts on its own or until an authority figure shuts it. And when you combine this lack of enforcement with the fact that the city doesn't punish crime whatsoever, nobody really sees the exit door as anything other than an entry. And it's people from all walks of life. Well-dressed folks, people with expensive handbags, everyone's doing it. Yet the problem is, every single year the city loses more and more money, and they've got to raise the fares higher and higher, causing the law-abiding to subsidize criminal elements of our society. Now, the first of several new plans that are of dubious value and possibly dangerous is they're gonna put timers on these emergency exits. Usually, you push this bar right here and it opens immediately, but some of them have a timer. I'm not gonna push that one because I'm not supposed to. It's not an emergency. But the idea here is that by adding a delay of about 15 seconds from when this is pushed to when it actually pops open, people using the exit gate because it's more convenient than the turnstile will realize that it's not. This particular exit gate here gets hit a lot more because it is near the Iron Maidens, which are decidedly inconvenient. Rotating through these takes a lot of work, plus it's near impossible if you're carrying anything large. Take, for example, somebody with their bicycle. How do they get out? And gates like this one are a prime candidate for such a timer because it doesn't take 15 seconds to walk through the twirly ones over here on this side. But even though the emergency exits are one of the main ways people sneak into the train, people also are able to break through the actual turnstiles in ways that not everyone is fully aware of. Yet now the city has a solution for these as well.
At 3 stations, the agency is testing panels on the turnstiles to make jumping more difficult. That will be expanded to 10 places this year. The MTA reports the existing turnstiles at 60% of stations have been modified to prevent them from being pulled back, allowing people to shimmy through.
So it appears that this particular bank of gates has the new security feature. There is no way to rotate the gate partially, slip your leg in, and then rotate the whole thing through. That's what people were doing, halfway back and then... But the reason these have probably never been secured is because if somebody's intent on getting in and they can't rotate through, someone who's really determined could sneak underneath. They could also jump over like many people do. And it could mean that the city is spending money fixing something that is going to be less effective than the timer on the gates. But that's why to combat people who are jumping, they're going to start installing metal barriers on these to raise up the width of this. The goal is to stop people from getting in a quick dip workout by boosting themselves up and then over the turnstile. Now, if the city is able to stop people from going over the turnstile or going through it, you'll have to crawl under it on your hands and knees. Which I guess means their thought process is that by making fare evasion as degrading as humanly possible, fewer people will decide to do it, especially if you're wearing nice clothes and you could probably pay to go in anyways. But one reason fare evasion crackdowns are controversial is because the MTA gets its money directly from the city. They've got a budget of $20 billion a year, and some people are wondering, why can't I just ride for free if they're so rich? And even though that might sound logical, the city says that fare evasion is not a victimless crime and that it hurts everybody, which is why they need to punish everybody.
Fare evasion on subways is estimated to cost the MTA more than $700 million. The MTA chairman sees it and feels it.
People are getting demoralized who play by the rules because they see somebody else breaking the rules, and we can't have that.
Over $700 million. Last year it was $690 million, which means that massive amount of money is just going up and up and up. And that's because most people don't realize that even though the city spends a lot of money to operate the subway, that money still has to come from somewhere. And the most logical way to run the subway would be as a business that earns revenue from people who ride the trains and uses that to fix the trains, improve service. But like every business, if people steal from it and loot it, so to speak, they've got to raise their rates on the fewer amount of paying customers who still remain. Which is why last month the city gave the police permission to start busting fare evaders once again. And you know what they found? They found that not only when they're able to monitor the subway's entrances and exits, more people to pay to use them, and they found that many of the folks who they arrested jumping in had warrants out for their arrest and were carrying weapons. Meaning that people who jump in and use the subway without paying may go on to do much worse once they're in. And this explains why back in March, after the city rolled out the National Guard, the subway system was still experiencing 6 felonies a day. It wasn't actually any safer, even though there were uniformed officers, because criminals were still running rampant through the system. Granted, most of the criminals apprehended in the system had their charges either reduced or dropped altogether, but if time is money and the city is wasting the time of its criminals, they'll be less likely to do things that are wrong if they know it's going to tie up their afternoon. But even though the city is losing more than $700 million a year to fare evasion, not all of it is taking place down here. In fact, the big losers are up on the street, where lawlessness takes place in broad daylight. So even though it looks like the subway is designed so every single person who lives here can ride it for free if they want to, the big loser for fare evasion is actually the bus system. And it's just come out that in the last 3 months of last year, 45% of bus riders did not pay their fare, compared with only 13% of subway riders.
The MTA announced a specialized team of MTA officers will now work to enforce the payment of bus fares.
The teams will not only be on the buses, but at bus stops as well.
The MTA estimates it has lost.
So before we get into this, it seems ridiculous that the buses operate if somebody gets on and refuses to pay. That's the first problem, because it means non-payment does not get your service denied. But to be honest with you, since there's no police on here, that's probably done to avoid putting the driver in a dangerous position. What if somebody doesn't want to pay and they come after the driver for that? And what driver are we going to expect to put their life on the line for a $2 bus fare? And look at the small space the driver has to operate in. It's really not possible to secure it any more than this. And of course, even though it's a felony if you attack a transit worker, people don't really care about felonies in this city.
The Eagle teams themselves, unarmed, uniformed, but watching very, very vigilantly for people who are fare jumping. They just want everyone to pay their fair share. That's the bottom.
You know, honestly, this whole idea sounds like a loser. If people aren't afraid of the police, how afraid are they going to be of unarmed security personnel? Although I'm sure an authority figure will be enough to scare off scofflaws who are wearing a suit on the way to a business meeting. The people who feel they've got nothing left to lose won't really care about minor rules. Which likely means that the only people who any of this is going to stop are going to be your level 1 fare evaders who just do it because everybody else does it. But fare evasion is so bad at this point and it's costing the city so much, they've got to do something.
People who are fare jumpers are also likely to engage in other types of crime, all too often targeting TWU members.
It's not fair to the millions of riders who play by the rules. That is money we should be using to provide better transit.
This joint agency.
Did you hear what the commissioner said? It's not fair to steal from the subway and bus system because then they can't use that money to improve it, repair it, and keep it operating. And it's especially unfair to the millions of riders every single day who pay their fare and watch other people hop in and ride for free. Not to mention the bus drivers who are subjected to abuse when criminals get on, harassing and endangering other passengers. Essentially, what you have on these buses is a motorized, wheeled version of the lawlessness they have on the subway, just in a much smaller, more dangerous, compact environment. Yet at the same time, I can't help wondering what fare evasion on buses would look like if the bus wouldn't move until everyone had paid. But the unfortunate reality is likely that it would take teams of police on every single bus, which would be more expensive than letting people ride the bus for free. It would be unaffordable for them to crack down on fare evasion on buses, which is why the city has another plan to get money for these things, and they're gonna get it from us in a way that we cannot avoid. So, you see these friendly neighborhood cameras up here? These are toll readers. They're gonna read your license plate and tax you for driving on the roads. And that's because the same company, the MTA, that controls the subways and the buses, they also control the roads. Now, today, the governor ordered a halt to congestion pricing, so it is temporarily being paused. But the infrastructure for it's already been built, and we'll probably see it at some point in the future. And the money that these things generate is gonna go right into the subways and buses to make them better, which doesn't sound controversial if you don't drive, if you take the train, but as a matter of fact, this is a tax that we are all going to pay whether we drive or not.
The MTA's controversial congestion pricing plan, which charges a fee to enter Manhattan Central Business District below 60th Street, has been the subject of more than half a dozen lawsuits. Now comes the Trucking Association, which wants a federal judge to declare it unconstitutional. The suit charges that New York...
So before we get into why truckers, like whoever's driving this truck right here, are upset about this tax because it's a little bit more unfair to them than it is to somebody who's in a car, realize that every vehicle on the road has a license plate. This is an unavoidable way to tax people. If people were wearing license plates on their foreheads, they'd be able to tax all of us just when we walked into the subway, but that's not how things work. Therefore, we're just gonna go and tax the cars and the trucks and the buses because they've got plates. And the reason these congestion fees are something we're all gonna pay whether we drive a car or not is because of how the city discriminates between types of traffic on the road. Cars, they only get hit once a day, but trucks are gonna get hit every single time they drive down here, even if it's multiple times a day. And how do you think your packages get to your doorstep? How do you think your food gets to a grocery store? It doesn't happen on the subway, that's how.
This is unfair to the trucking industry and the businesses that rely on us. And we are non-discretionary travel. We have to make those deliveries at the time that our customers demand.
So for non-discretionary travel, there may be breaks for traveling in the congestion zone off-peak. If trucks could drive off-peak, they'd save 3 times the amount of money. But the way it stands right now, if you're a trucker and you make 3 deliveries a day, you're looking at $75 a day. Which is $25,000 a year in fees just because the city can't get people to ride the bus and pay for it. And let me ask you a question. The stuff on this truck that's getting driven under the congestion readers right now, how do you think they are gonna pay for that $75,000? Excuse me, $25,000. They're gonna jack up their rates for deliveries. And who buys the stuff that's on that truck eventually? Us. We do. Whatever's on a truck or a bus that gets hit with a congestion fee is going to get unloaded at its final destination. And from there, all of the prices are going to get marked up to compensate for the extra costs. Which means we're all going to be paying for this when we buy our food, when we interact with any business in the city, when we turn on our heat in the wintertime, because fuel, last time I checked, doesn't get transported in the cramped conditions on the New York City subway. Every fast food item, every candy bar, every bottled water will now cost more. And the cost of living in New York City is about to get even more outrageous.
The industry, which moves 90% of the goods that enter the city, is also attacking the fare structure. Trucks pay $24 or $36 depending on the size of the vehicle, and they have to pay every time they enter the zone. Joe Fitzpatrick, who delivers...
That's insane. 90% of everything New Yorkers consume comes to the city by truck. And you know, the other problem here is there aren't really any discernible benefits from congestion pricing. The subway already looks the way that it does and feels the way that it does, and that costs $20 billion a year. If the city earns a couple billion more a year, are they really going to use all of that money efficiently? Or are they going to waste it? And are we going to end up with the exact same subway we have right now, just after everything costs way more? And after we're told, oh, it's getting better. Give it time, give it time, give it time. And not only are the pollution savings going to be negligible, as massive trucks like this right here still have to come in, but the MTA's own studies show that pollution will just be redistributed to areas of town that don't have congestion pricing yet. The Bronx, Staten Island, downtown Brooklyn, every outer borough that doesn't have a reader at this point is now going to see more traffic as people try to get as close as they can before driving in. And you know what that means? There's going to be more traffic in those places too, which means the solution to that will be more congestion pricing. And eventually we will all pay more for everything, no matter where we live, no matter if we come into the congestion zone. Is that what's happening? Is New York City going to just charge us all for doing basic things because it can't run its own systems in a way where the criminals who engage in lawless behavior get punished and change their ways? How would you secure the New York City subway? How would you secure the buses? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.